Unbroken centuries of natural cycles in a land seen magical, mystical through the eyes of those who lived by its harsh and obscure dictates. To tear survival from nature unadorned, to live a life fixed by the rushing rivers, the changing seasons, the habitats of living things. To live in communion with a land of magic places. That is how it was before. Cabot, Cartier, Champlain, and the rest brought Europe to what would one day be Canada. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the trickle of immigrants became a downpour that would later become a flood as East Coast fishing gave way to trading in furs, as the European adapted to the new harsh land and moved inland. Up the St. Lawrence, the Ottawa, the French, the Great Lakes and beyond, to Athabasca country. The impetus was fur, and the pelt of the beaver was the most prized of all. The men of the fur trade pushed deep into the unknown continent, far in advance of settlement, moving further and further west as the worth of the beaver skin ascended and the nearest stocks of beaver declined through heavy trapping. The first traders were French, mostly independent, coureurs de bois, who adapted Indian ways to the search for the beaver. They lived and traded with the Indians, who trapped the precious furs at a rate not even considered before the coming of the white man. And in the end, these traders and those that would follow made the Indian almost totally dependent on European trade goods. The Battle of the Plains of Abraham made Canada British, and the leaders of the fur trade became English and Scottish businessmen. A breed of tough, individualistic men whose mode of operation would do much to lay the foundations of present-day Canada. The search for the beaver extended beyond the prairies. Trade routes became longer, unmanageable, and unprofitable for independent traders. Thus was the Northwest Company formed in 1779. The company was a loose coalition of partners, almost all Scots. This great fur trade organization, so different from its major rival, the Hudson's Bay Company, melded the partners' business acumen and French labor and knowledge of Indian ways with the natural technology and the agricultural and survival techniques of the natives to make fur trade across Canada an extremely profitable venture. And Fort William would become the vital cog in this massive fur trade machine. The company's brigades could not make the 6,000-mile canoe trip from their posts throughout the Northwest to Montreal and back in the few brief months when the rivers were free of ice. Thus, the partners devised a system. A transshipment point would be developed halfway between the posts of the West and the ports of the East. To this transshipment point, the winterers from the Athabasca country would bring their furs, to be met by voyageurs from Montreal carrying supplies and trade goods. An exchange of cargoes would take place, and the winterers and the voyageurs could return to their bases before the onset of winter. They would call this meeting the Great Rendezvous. Grand Portage was the first such transshipment point, but the American Revolution placed it in the hands of the United States. Under the threat of forthcoming customs duties, the Northwest Company cast about for another site and found it at the mouth of the Kaministiquia River on the north shore of Lake Superior. Here, beginning in 1800, the partners built their inland headquarters, a showplace named Fort William, in honor of William McGilvray, the company's leading partner. In the spring, the winterers, the plumed aristocrats of the fur trade, began the trek from the westerns in north canoes filled to the gunwales with rich pelts. And from Lachine, the squat voyageurs set out pushing their larger 36-foot birch bark cargo canoes, heavily laden with trade goods and supplies, through Canada's first wet highways. For over 2 months, they labored to reach Fort William, the Avon, the Milieu, the Gouvernail, straining at their paddles, 60 strokes a minute, carting 90-pound packs, 2 to a load around dangerous water. Grueling journey, filled with 18-hour days through river, portage, and lake.
Hey, Baptiste, nos frères sont rapide. Gouvernail, vite, dirige pour l'île. Le temps s'annonce très mal. Et nous n'avons pas le temps d'atteindre notre prochain encampement.
evenings of jumbled half-real deliriums, induced by the long labor of the day, superstition, and a magic land unknown beyond the campfire's glow. Until one day in July. Canoe after canoe arrived at the fort, until 2,000 people threatened to burst it at the seams. The great rendezvous had begun. The partners pored over pelts and reports, evaluating, considering, and making business decisions for the coming year, as the voyageurs mended their canoes, clothes, gear, and themselves. But business and make and mend were just a part of the rendezvous. Men of rank dined graciously in the great hall and danced sedately with native women invited especially for the occasion, while the voyageurs, banned from within the palisades, had their own brand of fun that went far beyond the daily canoe competition.
Ils ont des pontons. Quand ils arrivent, ils te frappent dans ça. Pareil pour moi. Oh oui.
Soon, but not too soon for some, the rendezvous was over. Business deals were completed, cargoes exchanged, and the voyageurs departed for Montreal as the winterers headed west to the hardship and loneliness of a land beyond the frontier. Fort William subsided once more into the quiet existence it knew through the 3 seasons each year that did not hear the raucous sounds of the rendezvous.
That hellish. What a sound, man. Shivers up your spine. I've been out here for 20 years, and that noise has just put me around the bend. Why can't we have something nice? Nice, gentle sound, but hell, the bloody brutes. Boy, oh boy. Where's the powder? Now I've got it. Now, just you wait, you big grey bastard.
And so it went, year after profitable year, until war with the United States in North America and with Napoleon in Europe caused a recession in the fur trade. Just as the intense rivalry between the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company was heating up to the point of bloody clashes, culminating with the massacre of Hudson's Bay personnel by members of the Northwest Company at Seven Oaks on the Red River. In retaliation, Lord Selkirk attacked and took Fort William in 1816. It was the beginning of the end. In 1821, the Northwest Company was absorbed by the Hudson's Bay Company. Times changed. Increasingly, furs were shipped by way of Hudson Bay, using York boats. There was no longer a need for the long trek by canoe to Montreal. And the men who rode the rind of the birch to the land of the beaver had brought in their wake a tide of settlement that changed the emphasis of commerce in Canada. The great rendezvous was no more. In 1881, Fort William was closed. By 1902, the last standing building of Fort William had been demolished to make way for the Lakehead's expanding role as a major transshipment point. And still, the routes used for the shipment of the raw materials that are the foundation of industrial Canada are the same as those used to transport the beaver. And still, the land is magical. The land that has dictated the shape of Canada by its rushing rivers, its majestic lakes, its natural wealth, and the habitats of living things, just as surely as it dictated the life of the first native Canadians. And again, the brawny days of the fur trade are with us, again and for you. Again, the roar of the great rendezvous echoes across the land as Fort William lives once more.